Welcome to another episode of the Providence Friarcast. It is February 4th, 2025. Providence coming off a 1-1 week, which is, I think, pretty much every week around here, with one win on the road at Seton Hall, where Brendan and I were in the arena together, for at least for parts of the second half. It's possible we were the difference in the win. It's hard to tell. As opposed to Saturday when Providence lost to St. John's at Madison Square Garden when all three of us were there. So we are 0-1 as a podcast at the same game, I think. I think that's probably true. So a 1-1 week for Providence, and it was a gritty 69-67 road win over Seton Hall, which was their fourth win in the last 6 games before the loss on Saturday. Another issue with turnover struggles, but they delivered when it mattered, thanks to a standout performance from all the Jersey guys. Jaden Pierre, Jabri Abdurrahim, who's come on very nicely lately, and Corey Floyd. Pierre leading the way. He had 16 points on 6 of 9 shooting in 38 minutes, and Abdurrahim knocking down clutch shots late, including 2 free throws with about 10 seconds left to push the lead to 68-65 before Seton Hall would score again, and then Crease would miss those free throws. Providence 5-5 after that one. We'll get into the St. John's game in a little while, which was wildly entertaining. It was good to be at the game and see it in person. But let's talk a Seton Hall, a win at the Prudential Center. And Brendan, I'll kick it to you.
Well, we saw Garway Dual have 10 points in the first half, including 4 made jump shots and 2 of them 3-pointers, which I guess should be expected. He had a good game. Prince Aligbe was very tough in the second half, got multiple, maybe 3-and-1s, maybe all of them courtesy of fouls by Jaden Pierre, who ended up fouling out in the last seconds on a bizarre, was it a 3-point shot? Was it a shooting foul on Isaiah Coleman? It was a strange game. It's actually the first part of the game, except for the lack of energy in the arena, was kind of similar to the St. John's game. Like, no one could really score. And then Providence started to take control late in the first half, and then the second half they blew it open. And I mean, I don't know what I expected when they're up 44-29 with 13 minutes to go. Also 15 minutes to go because there were like 2 minutes of no scoring there. But we gave away the whole lead quite quickly, which was disappointing. A lot of turnovers. 4 turnovers each from Jaden Pierre and Bensley Joseph, and then 3 more from Ryan Mila in limited play. He's now, I think, 2 straight games where he hasn't scored, which he certainly needs to figure out and adjust. Last 4 games, he didn't play one of them against Villanova. He has 3 points over the last 4 games on 1 of 9 shooting, or 1 of, actually worse than that, 1 of 14 shooting. Not great from Ryan Mila. But the Friars got some big baskets late in the game. Even Rich Barron had a running bank shot. It was kind of like, I don't know. It was the kind of game that on the road in the opposite of a raucous environment, just kind of pull it out and move on. I didn't feel it would have been nice to win by 15, I guess, but I didn't feel bad winning by 2. I thought it set up the St. John's game pretty well, that Coach English could rightly tell the team that you guys were not good. You had 19 turnovers to only 12 assists. You gave up 30 free throw shots to the other team and 13 offensive rebounds. So I think it was like if you're going to win a game by 2 that you led by 15, this was kind of the way to do it. Plenty to critique. But ultimately the Friars won. They got contributions from 7 players, or really 6. Jabri off the bench was quite good, as you mentioned. Got back to 500. Devin Carter was in the house wearing a very bright orange jogging suit. Saw some people that I knew, which was cool. The mayor was in town there. I sat near him in the first half, and then I sat with Mike in the second half, or stood with him. So it was I don't know. It was a basketball game that the Friars won, so I can't be too upset. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I think the turnovers were the biggest problem. I mean, I think part of what you saw both that game and the St. John's we can talk about later is handling the pressure was a problem. Seton Hall, for all of their faults and limitations, they play hard for 40 minutes. And especially with a lot of their God play, they push around, they bump, they shove, they do a little bit of everything. And I think that caused problems for Jaden and for Bensley. And I think that's why they had the 8 turnovers. The positive side is we bent, but we didn't break. Like you said, we got that big lead, but Seton Hall came all the way back, and we were able to withstand it. On the road, like you said, it wasn't the most, feisty crowd or anything, but it's still a road win. You're away from home. I think to do that was a good sign, and we kind of said that they need to win at least one. It felt good then, except for the fact that we obviously felt that we were that close to winning on Saturday as well. Oswin, to me, just keeps showing each game. He had foul trouble against Saturday and Tuesday, which is the biggest concern for him. But he's doing everything. He's added a little bit to his offensive game. He's still blocking shots. He's getting the rebounds. I think that's something to watch. If we can kind of fight through for the next 4 weeks, I can see him being a guy who steps up on the big stage in Madison Square Garden in March, and wouldn't be surprised to see us be able to take out a team or two. Watching all these games, you see that the difference between the top and the bottom teams, especially for teams like Providence, Georgetown, Villanova, Xavier, that are in that middle, they're not a lot better than the Butlers and the Seton Halls on one end, but they're not much different than Marquette and St. John's and Creighton on the other. It's kind of like where they're in that position where they could lose to anybody or beat anybody. And I think we saw that this week. And that was, the scare with Seton Hall, but the potential promise with St. John's. I did want to have to note, because if I don't do it, I feel like I've left out the incredible defense Corey Floyd showed against Seton Hall. He was all over the place. And I think
what he's going to say is that Isaiah Coleman was over 10 in his return to action for Seton Hall, which he was, and Corey Floyd had plenty of that.
Yeah. I was just going to say, on one of the other interesting things to keep an eye on and talking about Oswin was he did foul out, and it's been a bit of an issue at times. And with Kalkbrenner, obviously tomorrow, which we'll get to later, something to keep an eye on. The other thing too, though, to mention is the continued. So like the guys kind of resurrecting from the bench. Kreist playing pretty well again. Austin was in foul trouble. Kreist was in there in the first half, particularly played pretty well. And then Jabri, who seemed like he was not even on the team anymore. It felt like the way he was basically not playing. And then all of a sudden he comes in and is just able to make shots and be a valuable piece off the bench, which if talking to the beginning of the year, I don't know that anyone expected him to be like a very limited off the bench guy. I think he was brought here to maybe be the starter. At the 4, probably more like the 3 once Bryce was back out and healthy, which obviously none of that panned out as expected. But just nice to see that he's playing in front of the home state fans. The South Orange, New Jersey native, went to Blair Academy. So Jabri with in 14 minutes, 13 points. That's pretty efficient, and only 1 turnover. 3 of 5 from 3. He accounted for 3 of their 9 makes from 3. He and Pierre had 6 of them. Joseph had 1, and Corey Floyd made 1. From 3, they were just 9 of 21, but which pretty good. 21. I kind of like that number of attempts, and then to have to shoot 43% on those, pretty good number there. They did finish the game strong, 6 of 8 from the field, which is a good sign. I think the building, as you mentioned, was really. I've been to a bunch of those games the last few years, and when they're good, it really can be a fun and loud place, and when they're bad, it's pretty tough. The student section, way more white shirts left on the chairs than there were students to collect them. Just not a great scene, unfortunately, for Seton Hall. They don't have any money, is really the bottom line. And you saw that Rick Pitino on Saturday with Kadari Richmond hitting the game winner, which we'll get to. It's a guy who should still be playing for Shaheen, as Rick said, just without the money to do so to keep him. So, any other thoughts on Seton Hall?
It's going to get a sweep. It's going to get a road win. I think my only other thought is, and this is something that came up against St. John's, is when Jaubrey is playing well, it does limit the opportunities for someone like Ryan Mila or Justin Fernandez or Rich Barron. I think that can create problems on defense, particularly because Jaubrey's he's tall, but he's slow. And I think we saw, particularly in the St. John's game, that our guards as well as Jaubrey struggled against the mid-range jump shot. Our defense was fine this week, actually, kind of surprisingly, but I do think that the defense. Well, one thing I'll note on the defense is Oswin. You mentioned foul trouble, fouled out of this game. 3 fouls in the first half of the St. John's game, including 2 early. And so I think that this is kind of a week of themes. They were in New York both weeks. We saw some similar things in both games, right? And so we can lead into St. John's with this. Lots of turnovers, good play by Jaubrey, fouls by Oswin that were problems, and kind of back-to-back, and now maybe 3 straight games where Ryan Mila didn't really make an impact. We moved to St. John's. Now that Brian's back, because Brian was there in person, and based on his Discord comments afterwards, he's better able to analyze the game in person than I am in real time, because I'm just like, I know what I'm seeing, but I don't know what I'm seeing a lot of times when I'm there in person, so I appreciate that from Brian. When I look at the St. John's game, I think, one, the turnovers were really, really bad. 20 turnovers. It's their worst performance the last couple seasons, except for the Marquette game, which was barely a basketball game on New Year's Eve. The other thing that sticks out as I look at the box score and I look at kind of the game flow, this Providence had a chance to open up a real lead in the first half. St. John's was not hitting shots, and Providence was up 17-10, 14-8, 19-15. But they really struggled to score late in the first half. If you look at it, they had 14 points with about under 9 minutes to go, and then the rest of the half they only scored 7, and including like 5 or 6 possessions to end the first half with no points. And St. John's was in the midst of a 14-2 run at that point. What we saw in the first half was a lot of turnovers. I think it was like 11 or 13 in the first half. Bensley Joseph really struggled. He didn't hit a shot until the 3-pointer he hit to tie the game in the last minute of regulation. Jaden Pierre struggled until late in the game as well. And really, it was Jaubrey. I remember I was with a couple buddies, and at halftime, they were like, "Oh, Jaubrey has more than half our points." Jaubrey had 11, and we had 21. So it's not. It's nice that you had a player with more than half your points, but when you only scored 21, it's a problem. And he actually had more than half our points for a large portion of the game when our offense was struggling. And so it's just frustrating because it did feel like a winnable game. St. John's did get an incredible performance from Kadari Richmond, probably his best performance of the season. He did everything, even made 3-pointers, steals, assists. He had 3 steals, 8 assists, 8 rebounds. It was set up for you a little bit, Mike, a 68-66 win. In terms of like what happened, if people didn't see it or don't know, we started the game with a weird set of plays. We had a tip. The tip went out of bounds in the front court, which meant the shot clock went on to 20 automatically, a rule that I didn't realize, but that a couple of people on our Discord, including Brian, were aware of. We ended up getting a shot clock violation. The next possession after an RJ Louis 3, Providence had the ball for a long period of time. I honestly was not paying attention to the shot clock. I just knew it wasn't going down. And Corey Floyd scored, and he didn't score again for a very long time. And then you could see Rick Pitino and the St. John's bench getting very upset. It turned out that the possession lasted more than 30 seconds. which, okay, fair enough. I was actually okay with the points coming off the board, but what I was not okay with was the turnover and it being St. John's ball. It took about 3 or 4 minutes to decide that was the actual call. To me, it doesn't seem fair. Like, how are you as a player supposed to just intuit that the shot clock has been not going down for a period of time? They should have, at the point when the shot clock was reset improperly, given the Friars the ball out of bounds. No points. Take the point to the board. That's fine. Should have been 13 or whatever on the shot clock and the chance for Providence to score. The first 3 minutes of the game took, I don't know, 25 minutes, not even exaggerating. Providence actually played well after that, came back to the lead. And they struggled in the first half. Second half, St. John's dominated for about 12 minutes. They had a separate 14-2 and 16-3 runs. They were up by 19 points with 9 minutes to go. 18 points at about 7 minutes to go. Then Providence stormed back. Jabri was unbelievable, honestly. It reminded me of when Jalen Lindsay did something similar, only maybe more impressive against St. John's. I think that was like 2018 maybe or 2017. He had 30-something points, and I remember sitting really close. I was like, what is happening? Jalen Lindsay, he's like, just can't miss. And Jabri was similar with maybe tougher degree of difficulty shots. He scored 27 on 8 of 11 from 3, 9 of 12 overall, 7 rebounds and 2 assists. He was excellent. Bensley and Jaden Pierre were both 1 for 7 on 3-pointers. That can't happen. And he really didn't get a lot of help. Jaden did score 11 points, but he wasn't very efficient. Oswin only scored 5 in 14 minutes. He was in foul trouble most of the game. Kreist had 9 on 4 or 5 shooting with 5 rebounds and 2 blocks in 21 minutes. Ultimately, Providence came down, hit many threes. There was a Jabri 3. There was a Corey Floyd 3. There was a Bensley 3 to tie it with 30 seconds left, 32 seconds left, 33 seconds left. Kim English called a timeout and gave the ball over to St. John's. They had the ball, the game tied. They set up a play where it was basically Dari Richmond on Jaden Pierre. There was kind of a soft screen at the top of the key. Pierre and Oswin were the players defending that ball screen. Richmond was able to get to about 12 or 15 feet and had an open jumper and made it. There wasn't really a strong contest. And then on the subsequent inbounds, no timeouts left. Bensley threw up a desperation half-court shot, and the Friars lost by 2. So I've been talking for a while. Those are my thoughts on St. John's, watching it from the, I think, section 226 in the front row of that section. Brian, Mike, what did you guys think?
My thought was, in one sense, we were lucky to be in the game because you can't count on Jabri doing that regularly. I mean, it was just amazing. And I was at the Jalen Lindsay game when he did that. The biggest difference was that St. John's team wasn't very good. This is one of the best, if not the best, defensive team in the country. The way he was getting shots, and he didn't have a lot of room on any of them. It's not like they were leaving him alone. He was coming off picks and getting quick releases, pulling up quickly. It was just amazing performance by Jabri. Very impressive. And it was kind of weird that, Corey Floyd, he only had the 1-3 in the last couple of minutes of the game. I think that brought them to within 4, 62-58. He had the shot that didn't count because of the shot clock. And then he had a 3-pointer that was ruled that he stepped on the line. And unfortunately, the camera work at CBSSN wasn't that great. But if you looked at the play from what I saw, his heel was actually in the air. Not that they would review it, but it's just we lost 5 points on questionable calls. So it is what it is. But in a lot of ways, we were lucky to be in the game. And before this started, I watched the Marquette St. John's game. I kind of felt a little better about Providence because that game tonight was close. St. John's ended up pulling it out. But St. John's, I think they missed 15 free throws, and they were horrible from 3. But they dominated the game except for that. I mean, Marquette was in the game because St. John's couldn't put them away, not because of anything they did. They took, Cam Jones really struggled. Stevie Mitchell really struggled. Everybody. It was an impressive performance, and it kind of made me feel better that we could compete with St. John's after watching them tonight.
Yeah, I think the biggest things for me being there was obviously the turnovers were bad. 20 turnovers, not good. That was probably ultimately what did them in. But the other concern and the other thing that Kim had mentioned the last time is what they do really well is they offensive rebound really well. And I think Providence more than held their own. They were pretty much even in offensive rebounds. The thing, and even in the game tonight against Marquette, you're talking they were 17-31 from the free throw line and 3 of 16 from three. St. John's was, but they still got 6 more shots. And against Providence the other night, they were shot 7 of 21 from three against 12 of 28 from three. They were 9 of 14 at the line against 6 of 9 at the line, but they took 12 more shots, 68 shots to 56 shots. So even with the rebounding being pretty even, I think it was 9 and 11 offensive rebounds. It was the turnovers, and this Kim has been mentioning this the last couple weeks in some of the post games. Is they're at a deficit in effectively what are offensive possessions. Like it's one thing to turn the ball over, but then to allow the other team to get offensive rebounds, you're really in for a real problem. So if they're able to do one or the other and shoot pretty well, they can stay in games. Obviously, you want to keep the turnovers to a minimum. It just feels like I felt pretty good about the rebounding, and I think Kreese played really well. Zuby was pretty good. He had some foul trouble as well, but definitely didn't have the game he had in Providence. 13 points on 5 of 12 and only 5 rebounds in 35 minutes. So, I felt pretty good. I mean, even RJ Lewis, who had a good game, made some shots. There were a lot of mid-range and elbow and like long twos, which are shots that they're usually pretty okay with giving up. So, yeah, I mean, he was 7 of 14 and he made 3 threes. He also had 8 rebounds, 38 minutes, pretty good game. But, they took a team that's really good in St. John's, who I think they're ranked 12th right now in the AP poll this week, and their computer numbers are great. They took them at home to down the wire, to having a chance in the last few minutes to win the game. So I think, yeah, and the results tonight against Marquette, and I think they have UConn this weekend. So, St. John's is continuing to be able to prove that they are really good and at the top of this league standings for a reason. But I felt pretty good overall about Providence because they did pretty well on the offensive glass. I mean, the turnovers are, I think, St. John's is good at forcing them, so you're not going to have no turnovers. But they only had 8 in the second half, 12 in the first half. So, and a few of those were like I think the first one counts. They get a turnover for the shot clock issue in the beginning. The first one is an actual turnover. It just seems silly to me that nobody was going nuts. So I figured it must be the right rule with the 20 seconds after the tip off. But to not have awareness, that's not. I mean, how do you not? Everyone should be able to see that they were playing clearly with no knowledge that it was not 20, that it was 20 instead of 30. And then the second turnover right away with the clock issue the second time. So some of those turnovers even of the 12, but St. John's is going to turn you over. It's just a matter of they just didn't do a good enough job. They had a lot of sloppiness, and they probably, we talk about this a little bit, they just play too many minutes probably with Bensley Joseph and Jaden Pierre on the floor together. Particularly Bensley has been a relatively high turnover guy in his whole career. And so getting a lot of minutes, I think he played, what did he play in this game? He played 34 minutes, Pierre with only 30, which is the least he's played in a while. 38 against Seton Hall the other night. He had 40 the time before. So, he's getting
2 fouls in the
yeah,
first
that's
half.
probably what it was. But it's just like there's trade-offs to all this. And we're going to see it again against Creighton on tomorrow night is, they have Stephen Ashworth, who had a great game against them last time, but is not a big guard. So I know, Brian, you talk about this all the time about Pierre and Bensley in particular, but mostly Pierre on defense can kind of hold their own usually against non-big physical guards. And Davon Smith again on Saturday was off the bench, banged up, didn't play as much as he normally would. But they give up on the defense with the hope that you're going to score on offense, and it didn't really happen on Saturday. Like the fact that if Jabri didn't go nuts, they lose this game by 15, probably maybe 20. Just based on what the other guys were doing. So, I felt pretty good about the rebounding. The other stuff is what it is. I One of the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get to Creighton is this is now a couple games in a row where Ryan Mila has not really played a ton and not really presented much in the way of production. And I'm curious if anyone has specific thoughts. My main thought is that he is now on the scouting report of the other teams after coming in and sort of being able to do whatever he wanted. So I think it's partially that they're paying some attention to him now, which they really probably were. He was pretty far down the scouting report, assuming he was even on it in some cases. And the biggest thing probably on the scouting report that's written in big red letters is can't shoot. And so it limits his ability to get into the lane a little bit because they just will sag off him and let him, dare him to shoot, because I think he's 3 of 14 from 3 and clearly doesn't want to shoot from 3. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, Mila.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to know is that Ryan's last good game was against Creighton, at least the one where last game where he scored. He had 10 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal in that game. In Omaha in 24 minutes, it's the most minutes he's played. Since that game, he hasn't played more than 23. I think that a couple of things that we're seeing. One is Ryan has seemed to be, maybe this has always been the case, but I've noticed it in the last few games. Whenever he gets bumped, he's been looking for the foul, and he's not been getting it. And whether he should get it or not, he's not been getting it. He needs to play through contact, be stronger with the ball. The shot is not going to change this year, I don't think. So it's more about what he can bring from his ability to create off the dribble and finish close to the basket, and his passing and his defensive rebounding. And amidst what you talked about, Mike, about teams having the scouting report, I do think that the other part about it is there's only so many minutes to go around, and as long as, again to your point, Mike, Bensley and Jaden Pierre are going to play so many minutes together, and it did seem like St. John's was basically daring those guys to beat them. They were really, really involved when they were on the floor. Bensley had 12 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 turnovers, a block, and 3 steals and 9 shot attempts. Jaden had 2 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 turnovers, and 14 shot attempts. They were just so heavily involved, and they were both not great. So I think that if you're going to play Bensley, if you're going to play Jaden, you need a center, right? That's Osmond. That's 3. And then separate from them, what is Kim been doing? Jabari's been playing really well, so he's been getting a lot of those minutes, and he wants a shooter in there. And then the 5th spot has been Corey, because he plays really good defense, and he does other things really well too. But Ryan's not a shutdown defender, and he's not a knockdown shooter. And he's more of a guy who does a lot of things well, but he's neither a shutdown defender nor a knockdown shooter. And so if you have a knockdown shooter at playing well like Jabari, and you shutdown defender like Corey, and you're consistent on playing Bensley and Jaden together, it doesn't really leave a lot of time for Ryan. And he's basically giving him a few minutes here and there. Against St. John's, he got 2 quick fouls. Against Seton Hall, he got some time, but wasn't really playing very well. And there are a lot of long defenders there. So I think he needs more time, but I can understand Kim wants to play with more shooters, and Bensley and Jaden and Jabari and even Corey, of course, too. They're all better shooters from the perimeter than Ryan. And then he still has options like Justin Fernandez and off the bench, as well as Rich Barron, who are better shooters than Ryan as well. I think the other thing you're seeing is that without Wesley Cardette, who's been out for a while, when Ryan is getting the best wing defensive matchup, the other team. That might change as Jabari plays better, although Jabari and Ryan don't really play together too much. But I think that's part of it too. I do think that, we need better passing as a team, and especially better passing from the forward spot. And so I would like to see Ryan there. I think he can move the ball. They rebounded pretty well on defensive glass, despite Ryan not playing very much. That's really one of his strengths, is defensive rebounding. And I also think that this matchup against Creighton coming up is not a bad one. Who are they going to have defend him? They could have Jemiah Neal defend him. Okay, great. He's a really good defender. Maybe that's not a great matchup for Ryan, but then you could have Jauberry or Corey Floyd being guarded by Jackson McAndrew or Stephen Ashworth. They don't really have a lot of great defenders. They have Neal and they have Kalkbrenner, and then everyone else is kind of just okay. So I do think that Mila could be in position to do things against Creighton if given the opportunity. We've seen things turn around so many times this year. From the beginning of the year to the middle to the end, like there's been so many times where like mentally maybe we've written guys off, but there's always like a next wind, whether it's Jauberry, whether it's Wes Cardet, whether it's Jaden coming off some bad games and moving to good games, Oswin with the in-season improvement, Ryan emerging and then now receding a little bit. And Justin Fernandez shows up. Like there's enough time left for Ryan to find the right matchups to do things well. I do think that when Jauberry's playing so well, it makes it easier for Kim to be less patient with Ryan because he knows he has a guy who's 6'9" who can knock down 3-pointers coming off the bench.
Yeah, I think, the two, you kind of covered everything. I do think a lot of it is the scouting reports that they know about him. You saw Saturday in particular, he was left wide open. They didn't even try and challenge him on a 3-point attempt, and you could see he was hesitant. He ended up passing it back out with a defender not within 5 or 6 feet of him. So I think that the scouting report plays a lot into it. I think I made the comment on our Discord channel that it's like a baseball play. The hot rookie comes up and he has a great first month of the season. Then teams have a scouting report. They make adjustments. They find out what his strengths and weaknesses are. And then it's up to him to adjust accordingly. And I think that's where Ryan is now, where he needs to adjust accordingly. And it'll happen. It's, probably a time thing. He's not an elite athlete. He's not, he's just a smart player who does a little bit of everything well. And I think that's probably easier to adjust to for the other teams. And, you mentioned that, he's played against a bunch of physical teams lately, which I think affects him. And then the last thing to me is I've wondered, he hasn't been the same since he was ill and missed the Villanova game. So I don't know if there's something lingering with that. Before that was the last strong game he had. And since then he's kind of struggled a lot. So maybe there's a little more to it than that. Maybe he's missed time. He missed time earlier in the year. And if you remember in the Georgetown game, he also took a hard fall and hurt his back. So it could be, a combination of everything right now. But I would suspect that we're going to see positive contributions from him before the end of the year again.
Yeah, we can move on to Creighton now. Just to preview tomorrow night, the Pink Out game. Providence was out in Omaha. What was that? Maybe 3 weeks ago. Lost by 20. Didn't feel as close as bad of a loss as that, I thought. But Creighton, we like to look at stats here on this podcast a lot from January 1st on, because that's sort of season 2.0 for this team, with Bryce being officially no longer available, and they've sort of changed their style a lot. So just even looking at Creighton over that same window, they're 7-1 in their 8 games. Their numbers are relatively similar, except that their defense actually has been better than it was before that. Providence's offense has been better. Defense has been pretty mediocre, like 154th in adjusted defensive efficiency at Bart Torvik. For reference, Creighton is 12th right now since January 1st in those 8 games. Particularly noteworthy is Ryan Kalkbrenner has been on a bit of a tear. His last 3 games, 23 points, 29 points, 22 points. Going back to the game when they played Providence, he scored 20 or more in 6 games. 5 games of the 8 in January. He's got over 20 points. And he's been blocking a fair amount of shots and playing really well. Stephen Ashworth, the other piece of their puzzle in terms of their experienced players. I was looking at this earlier, and if you remember the game in Omaha, Creighton just shot insane from 3. Case in point for that, Mason Miller, who so far who was 2 for 3 that night from 3, which doesn't sound That doesn't sound so crazy. It's not like an 8-made-3 game like Jabri, except that he's 2 for 10 in league play. So that would be 0 for 7 against everybody else. So, I'd say Isaac Trout went 4 for 4. He's actually a pretty good 3-point shooter. He just made all 4 against Providence. They shot the ball really well. Thought Osmond played pretty well against Cockburn last time. That's another matchup to watch. This time around, when they're playing at the AMP, who wants to take the first stab at Creighton?
Well, I'll throw a quick one out there because, watching them at the beginning of the season when they did my preview, I had Creighton and St. John's as the top 2 teams in the league. And I kind of think right now that's where we are with all the, Connecticut, when they get McNeely back, which I guess is going to be Friday, could move up. But I think both those teams are better than Marquette right now. Not as a knock to Marquette, but they're just playing better at this moment. I also started looking at doing my all conference team for the first half of the year, and I came up with 7 guys, but I had both Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner on that. And I think the way Stephen Ashworth has grown this year has been incredibly impressive, and that's the biggest reason why why Creighton is where they are. I know he won't get it, but I think if we talk about value to a team, I would have him under strong consideration for Player of the Year. Last year, he was trying to fit in with multiple ball handlers, a star center, and it took him a little while to find his groove. The second half of the year, he was very good. And this year, after a few games, when they lost Pop Isaacs, they don't have another ball handler. If we can get him into foul trouble, they're really in deep doo-doo, if you will. He's averaging, I think, 35 or 36 minutes a game in conference play. And he just does a little bit of everything. It's almost, if it's not against your team, it's kind of fun to watch the way he works with Kalkbrenner and how he uses Kalkbrenner's size to his advantage, both off the screen, pick and roll, throwing that little hook alley-oop to him. He's done everything this year, and he's even rebounding. I think he's averaging 5 rebounds a game now this year. He's one of the top assist men in the country. He's averaging 17 points a game, and he's the only one in conference play ahead of Corey Floyd in free throw shooting. He's shooting like 97% for the season. Jemiah Neal has stepped up to give them a third threat. Jackson McAndrew is probably an all-freshman caliber player, and and now that they've added, hope I don't butcher his name, Fedor Zujic is getting some Zukic is getting some playing time. They get a little more length than they have had previously, and that they had even the first time we played them. They're going 7 or 8 deep now, so I think it's a winnable game, but it's going to be a tough challenge for us. And I think that they're going to be a team that'll be called fairly early on NCAA Selection Sunday.
Yeah, man, I think when it comes to Creighton, we've seen them change a lot since Pop Isaacs left, and that's allowed Ashworth to emerge. If you look at, I'm looking at stats just since the last time we played, including that game. Ashworth has had his trouble with turnovers. If you look at his kind of game log, you see a decent amount of turnovers, including 4, 7 in the last 11 in the last 2 games, and 3 in every game before that. He hasn't had fewer than 3 turnovers since their last loss, actually, against Marquette on January 3rd. But he actually has a higher usage rate, bigger part of their offense from a volume perspective than Ryan Kalkbrenner. Helps Ryan Kalkbrenner be more efficient. Ryan Kalkbrenner's offensive rating in this stretch since last time they played, which they haven't lost, is 151, 76% on twos. So I think Ashworth and Kalkbrenner work together as well as any combo. Like, we saw Oso and Tyler Kolek last year. This is kind of this year's version of that. And I think Kalkbrenner is clearly better than Oso. Ashworth not as good probably as Tyler, but maybe in some, maybe a better offensive combo. And Kalkbrenner is obviously a great defensive player. He's got one of the best block rates in the league. Ashworth's like second in assist rate in league play. I agree to an extent with what Brian said on the depth. They do go more like 8 deep now. But we've seen Jackson McAndrew's play fall off a bit of late in conference play. Zugic has been better, but still just okay. But he's and he still only played like 7 or 8 minutes against Villanova. Jason Green is kind of as a starting 4 actually, and then Isaac Trout and Mason Miller are like sharpshooter off the bench. But as we heard, Mason Miller hardly shoots at all, and when he does, he only makes it against Providence. Trout's a really good shooter, but he's low volume. So what you're dealing with is like Neal as like a solid third option, more of a defense first guy, but who can score and pass is one of his best attributes. Kalkbrenner and Ashworth are maybe the best 1-2 combo in the conference offensively, and like complementary shooters around them. So I do think this is a game where the Friars actually have a depth advantage. They can play a little bit differently. What we remember from the last game when they played is that Kalkbrenner really created havoc for Jaden and Bensley in that game. They struggled a lot and on defense and on offense, and a big part of the Friars only scoring 0.9 points per possession, which is one of their worst offensive performances of the month, even considering how poorly they played in offense at Seton Hall and St. John's. Bensley was 1 for 10 in that game with 1 assist and 1 turnover, and Jaden was 1 for 9 with 1 assist and 3 turnovers. So at home, they need to play better. They really seemed spooked by Kalkbrenner when they drove to the lane. And of course, in that game, Jabari wasn't really a factor. Neither was Justin Fernandez, and both those guys have been making solid contributions of late. So it was really more Corey Floyd, Wesley Cardette, and Ryan Mila and Oswin were like the top 4 players of that game. I do think it shows Providence's depth. We need to win more of these games, right? But it does seem like we have the kind of team where a different set of 3 or 4 or 5 guys steps up. But ultimately, it's going to be hard for us to beat a good team without Bensley and Jaden playing well. So that's what I'm looking for. Assuming they both play 30-plus minutes, which I assume they will, they need to play well and make shots. And the good news is that Creighton doesn't turn people over. And so I'm not as worried about Providence committing a bunch of turnovers. But they do need to make shots because Creighton also doesn't allow a lot of offensive rebounds.
Yeah, I think it's a winnable game at home. Any game in this league pretty much is at this point. And I think they'll probably be around a 4-point underdog. We'll find out. I haven't looked what the line is. I could look at some point. But that's going to be a winnable game. And the key stat, I was talking about this the other day, is even like at that Seton Hall game, we're talking, it's like, oh yeah, like it'd be nice to win by 15 and nice to get for the metrics, but we're at a place now where the only metric that matters is Big East wins. So stack as many of those as you can, and then you see what happens when you get to the Big East tournament. And right now Providence is sort of in that big mosh in the middle where there's a lot of clog up with Georgetown's playing right now, but they're 5 wins and a bunch of these teams. So it's going to be incumbent that they just get as many wins as they can. It's easier to win at home than on the road, certainly. Not that this is going to be easy, but I think there's a path to victory against Creighton. So we can move to Butler now, which will be Saturday. I think it's a 5:00 tip, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll say one more thing on Creighton as you transition is, since the last time they played, Creighton's 7th nationally in adjusted defense and 10th in 3-point percentage defense. That could regress. So I think I'm looking for opponents are just shooting 25% on threes over the last 6 games that Creighton has played. At Providence, and I guess a Providence team that has really shot pretty well on threes of late, 36% over the same stretch. I do hope that regresses hard against Creighton on Wednesday.
Yeah, I also keep forgetting today's Tuesday. So on to Butler. They are since January 1st 2-7 over that time, and since they played Providence on January 8th, which was in the midst of quite a long losing streak. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a long one. 9-game losing streak, which culminated with a loss actually in their game after Providence when they lost at home against Creighton. Since then, they beat Seton Hall, lost to UConn, beat DePaul, and then lost to Marquette at home and Georgetown on the road in a tight one, 73-70 in their last game. They'll also play Wednesday night That game will be in Newark against Seton Hall, team that they beat at home 3 weeks ago or so. They it's been kind of it's like the anti Rick Pitino year 2 for Thad Matta, not going well, and it's similar story to Seton Hall. I think in a lot of ways they just don't have the budget probably at this point, and the reality of today's college basketball, and especially in the league like the Big East, if you don't have the budget to pay players for NIL, then you're probably gonna have a really hard time competing in your league. So again, 2-7 this month. Similar to Creighton, not a big forced turnover team. They're actually one of the worst in the country since January 1st at turnover defense at 10.5% turnover rate. So they do get to the line. They do have a solid adjusted offensive efficiency. It's actually similar to Providence's in this stretch, and the defense has been similar as well. But they just have not been able to figure out how to put games together. Telfort's really good. Pierre Brooks is really good. I'm not sure either one of those guys is good enough to carry a team like Butler. They're getting some other production, from other guys. Actually, I thought Andre Screen played pretty well last time out when I was watching some of their game. But that's a game that, the other X factor though in this is Providence not played great at Hinkle, particularly in recent years. I've been out to Hinkle for a Providence loss, and they had that game last year. People will probably remember that was the Joshua Duro baby game, his first child born. Coincidentally, his second child was just born the other day. So congrats to Josh and his wife on baby number 2. But baby number 1 came last year right around this game. And so Josh did not make the trip. The baby was born, I think, the night before the game. And there was some talk that he might get on a charter that morning and fly out there, which didn't happen. And they end up losing in a game which Corey Floyd got fouled pretty clearly on a dunk towards the end of the game there. That would have at least given them a chance to win at the free throw line. So, this is a Butler team similar to Seton Hall. You have to go on the road. It's not easy to win on the road, but they are bad. And you have to win if you're going to, make any moves in the standings in the Big East, even if it's a bad team on the road, it's still the Big East. So, and just to give people some who are listening to this live and seeing the title, which I had to come up with earlier today, just so everyone's aware, these titles are not like after the fact based on what we've talked about. And so we're almost, we're 47 minutes in. I haven't mentioned it. But this truly is Schrödinger's basketball team. If anyone's familiar with the Schrödinger's cat is a famous science thing, for lack of a better term, where there's a cat in a box with a vial of poison, and you can think of the cat as both alive and dead because you don't know if the vial has broken or not. So this team truly can, and to use Kim English's verbiage, they can both eliminate losing and they can both not eliminate losing. So this is a team that you never know what you're going to get night in and night out, with their ability to do things that are meeting the standard versus things that are not meeting the standard, to continue to talk in Kim's language. But this is a game that they need to win if they're going to actually have a chance to jockey for any seeding. And I think it's a game that they can win. Butler, again, not very good. It's just, is it going to be hard to win on the road at Hinkle, a place they have not really traditionally shot the ball well?
All right, I'll go first then. Butler, to me, is a team that they have 2 very talented players. Another good player, that's Patrick McCaffrey, is a good third option for them with Brooks and Telford. And if you look, like I said, their record isn't very good. But if you look, other than the Providence game, since they got pummeled by Houston early in the year, they've been competitive in every one of their games that they've lost. They lost by, looking here quickly, 3, 9, 10, 4, 8, 8. Then it was the game we clobbered them. They lost to Creighton by 4. They lost to Connecticut in overtime. They lost to Marquette by 9. And then they lost at Georgetown by 3 the other day. So it's not like they're non-competitive. I do think it's a good matchup for us because, again, they don't have the top flight physical guards to give us a lot of trouble. I think that plays into us well. Telford, I've been a big fan of his since he was at Northeastern. But I think Corey Floyd or Wesley Cadet, if he's healthy, can match up with him. Pierre Brooks, he's a terrific player, but he's not going to carry the team to victory. And Andres Green, again, I agree with Mike that he's playing much better this year, but he's a great backup. He's not a starter. He's not an elite starter in the Big East. And I think that between Oswin and Priest, we've got an advantage there. So this is another game. We win tomorrow. You're looking in good shape to be able to go in there, get the win, and now all of a sudden you're 7-6 in Big East play. Probably got a lock right there on 5th place for the time being. I think it's a good opportunity for us. But it's one of those things that if we don't win 2 this week, if we lose 2, we're probably looking at being in the 8-9 game for the Big East tournament. So it's an important game for us, but I think this is one we should win, and the Creighton game is one we can win.
Butler's defense has been very poor, even as they've been competitive of late. They don't have much rim protection, even with Andre Screen there, as you mentioned. 11th in the Big East play in block rate, 11th in Big East play in forced turnovers. And so I do think that it is a good matchup. They're also 11th, again, 11th last in the Big East in offensive rebounding. Like, they're kind of the anti-St. John's. So obviously St. John's has not really been that bad a matchup considering how good St. John's is. Providence lost them twice by 2 points in the last second shot. So, and in a sense, it feels like a bad matchup, but in reality, Providence has matched up with St. John's okay when in the end. But it does feel like this is a better matchup. Butler's just not a good defensively. We see they have the shortest defensive possessions. It's not because they're running full court presses, it's because teams are just running through them. And so I think that that should serve well for the type of players who like to go to the rim on the Friars, and guys like Corey Floyd and Ryan Mila, Oswin, and Bensley, and then those guys also opening up 3-point shots for other players. The defensive matchups are hard. Both Jamil Telford at 6'7" and Pierre Brooks at 6'6" are difficult matchups. Providence doesn't have guys of that size unless Cardet comes back to defend them. Jabari's not a good defender despite his size. Ryan's a little bit undersized and also not a top-notch defender. So it means a lot of Corey Floyd or just mixing and matching. I do think there's another team that's not very deep. The biggest weakness of Butler is that they don't have good guards. Finley Bizjack's been playing a bit better as a sophomore. Colby King has not been great. Landon Moore is not really a Big East guard from my perspective. And so their top 5 players in minutes of late are 6'4", 6'6", 6'7", 6'9", 7'1". And so it's a big lineup, but it's not a great ball handling lineup, and it's not a lineup that's going to put a lot of defensive pressure on the other team. They can knock down some shots. Bizjack particularly, Telford and Brooks has actually been a little bit in slumps recently shooting the 3-pointer. And Patrick McCrafty can shoot as well if allowed to be open, but he's a kind of a low volume guy. Similar to Creighton in the sense that neither team is particularly deep, but different from Creighton in that Butler has 2 good top 2 guys, but they're both maybe like second, borderline third team guys, depending on who you look at. Whereas with Kalkbrenner and with Ashworth, you have 2 of the best 5 or 6 players in the Big East. Obviously, one's on the road and one's at home. It's an interesting stretch. Like, you look at this stretch for Providence, and they have 5 games. They play 3 teams that are probably a bit better than them at home, and they play 2 teams that are probably a bit worse than them on the road. So they have Creighton at home, Xavier at home, and Villanova at home, and then Butler and Georgetown on the road. So these are all going to be tight spreads. You mentioned the Creighton spread probably about 4. You're right, Mike. It's 3.5 is the opening spread. And Providence will also probably be an underdog or slightly at Butler as well. These 5 games are going to be huge. And we got 2 this week, and we got 2 next week, and then the return match at Georgetown the following week, setting up the last couple weeks of the season. I don't know. Like, it feels like the matchups aren't that bad. I do worry about how Creighton's thinking about the Creighton game. The Creighton's ball movement and screening action really ate up our guards at Omaha. Maybe we get a better whistle here on those sorts of things, or maybe we just play it better. Against Butler, it's like it's a road game. They can knock down shots, and we might not, and that could be it. But you know, I got as frustrating as the season has been, Providence has been pretty competitive, and they should be able to compete in these 5 games coming up, and I expect them to, and I expect them to win more than they lose in the stretch.
Yeah, it would be great if Cardette was back. He did not play at Seton Hall and played 1 minute, I think, against St. John's. Clearly didn't look healthy still in that one play in the St. John's game where he just didn't seem to have some explosiveness. So he was one of their better players last time they played Butler. He had 17 points and 4 rebounds on 7 of 11 shooting. So, that obviously is something that would be, that level of production would be something that would be nice to see. But, Jabri is playing way better than he did back then. He only played 15 minutes in that game, was 1 of 6 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. So, you get some more shooting, you lose some of the playmaking and defense from Cardette, but maybe Mila can get back to some more playmaking, and Fernandez could do some more shooting, maybe depending on who's playing well and who's hitting, and Rich Barron. That we're getting awfully close to those 13 dudes that we were promised at the beginning of the year. It's just a matter of figuring out which guys are going to show up each night instead of having 13 every night. So I think the Butler game will be an interesting one to watch. Got to get the one against Creighton first. I think we are now at the most exciting part of the program. There's going to be one guy who's going to be extremely excited at this internet sensation of a segment, which is remember this guy. I will be shocked if many people remember this guy. Does anyone want to? Does anyone remember this guy?
I can take it. Yeah, we're talking about a legend from a Providence team that went to the Elite Eight. For those who don't remember, I mean, there might be someone named Adam. I had no idea, despite growing up with this team. This guy played for the Friars. He crossed over well, actually, no, he didn't. He was in the last 2 years of Pete Gillen. Backup center extraordinaire. He once dunked at West Virginia. I remember that. His name is Dungo Njai. 7'1", started his career for 2 years at Providence. And you can see here, the best clip we have of him is of him just being on the floor for a game against Boston College in February 1997. This is from Friar TV, the legend Friar TV. There's some good plays. This isn't some good Sham God. There's some good Jamal Thomas here. If we can get it to work with the internet is a tough place, but yeah, he came with much fanfare. Shot blocker. He did block 29 shots in about 222 minutes, which is pretty good. If he played 30 minutes a game, that would be like 4 blocks a game. That's pretty good. But ultimately, he was kind of just taking up space behind Ruben Garces. Ended up transferring to Delaware, where as a senior, he started 20 games and was, best I can say probably is he started 20 games. He still only scored 3.9 points per game, and he had 5 rebounds. But you can see here, there's Dungo Njai defending Miles Simon in the Elite Eight game. It shows, how incredible a coach Pete Gillen was at times, and his ability to go to Elite Eight with Dungo Njai actually playing basketball minutes. Remember, if you remember that game against Arizona, we finished the game with Kofi Pointer and Corey Wright on the floor. I believe Kofi Pointer from Baltimore, for those of you who are scoring at home, he came in part because Jason Murdoch elbowed the guy in the back and got a technical foul and basically was benched the rest of the game. And Austin Crozier was fouled out on a play where he didn't even touch the player. It was a different Providence player, I believe Garces, that fouled him. And in that game, Dungo Njai also played. That's about most I can say about Dungo. Any other comments from the group?
The only things I remember about him is he wore a uniform that looked like it would fit Grease DeSantico, and he was probably 100 pounds less than Grease. His uniform just hung all over the place on him. That's when he used to wear the really long shorts, and it was almost comical because he was so big and so thin. He had this bulky shirt, and I thought about it afterwards because I really don't have much of a memory of him, but I do remember he did get a steal in the Arizona game. It was because I remember the announcer talking about how could they miss him? They threw the ball right to him, and he's 7 feet tall. And I think it was Billy Pack was saying, how do you miss a guy that big and throw him the ball? And that's the only thing I remember. I do know that he did develop into a good shot blocker at Delaware. That was probably the peak of his competition level. But, it's very hard for a guy who's 7 feet tall to generate no memories. And he was able to do that. So I remember him being on the team, and I remember him being big and wearing a uniform, but I couldn't tell you much else about him.
3 blocks a game at Delaware in his senior year, a native of Dakar, Senegal. There were he was probably the first Njai or Jai that I encountered in my childhood, and there were many more after him. Mokhtar Jai was a guy that I think was on some North Carolina teams that went to the Final Four. Mamadou Njai, I think was a guy too. So I feel like Providence was a forerunner in the Njai. I don't know thing.
Well, I just looked this up quickly because I finally got my internet fully working, and I apologize for being out for a bit. Had all kinds of problems here, but amazingly, again, 7'1". His freshman year at PC, he was 7 out of 38 from 2. I mean, that's pretty hard to do at 7 feet tall when he did take a 3-pointer, but when you're shooting next to the basket and you can't get a basket, that's oddly impressive. So I hope Frank's happy.
That is quite a stat. 18%. I'm glad you pointed that out. The idea of a 7-foot player being 18% on 2-pointers, the opposite of touch. We've had discussions about whether Oswin has touch. I think Brian and I agree that Oswin has a lot of touch around the basket, despite not being like a knockdown shooter or anything like that. Oswin as a freshman is 55 of 77 or 71% on 2-pointers. That's a record that hopefully will not be broken of lowest field goal percentage by a 7-footer in Providence college history.
There haven't been a lot of 7-footers in Providence college history. And on the flip side, you have the Randall Hankey, who had very good shooting percentage. So Providence is all over the map in a lot of these situations, and I'm glad that we could remember this guy. That will do it for this episode of the Providence Friarcast. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. If you want to listen to this on any podcast feed, it's also on YouTube. You can go and subscribe to the YouTube. We're live on x.com or Twitter, wherever you want to find us. We're live usually Monday nights. This week we pushed it because the game is on a Wednesday, but we'll hopefully be back on Monday, and we'll see everybody after